afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about Max Weber's approach on religion. This is part of the series Sociology of Religion. Max Weber was a sociologist who gave us the interpretative or Verstehen method of understanding sociology. His approach was different from Marx and Durkheim, who were kind of belonging to the positivist school, and they were in search of an objective reality that could be understood through sociology. For them, society was like a kind of project which could be understood by using scientific method. Weber kind of says that actions has to be understood with reference to the meaning which is attached to them. And context of religion, he is giving us understanding that there are two things. One is religion, the other is economy. Now, does economy leads to religion, which is the argument given by Marx, or is religion responsible for a particular economic form? And Weber falls into the second category. For Weber, Protestant ethic gives rise to the spirit of capitalism. In both Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism, there is a common factor, or there are certain common features, and these are the desire to accumulate wealth through rational legal method and to ensure that you are going to lead an ascetic life, this worldly asceticism, and kind of focus on increasing the glory on earth. Now, in order to understand his approach to religion, now let us understand what is Protestantism. Now, Protestantism is a religion of protest. As the term itself says, it is a religion of protest. And when did it arise? It arose during the 16th century in Europe in the period known as Reformation. The Reformation was basically a movement towards rectification of Christianity, in which it was kind of believed that church was kind of got distant from masses and was getting more into kind of politics and becoming corrupt. Therefore, there was a movement to separate the entire Reformed church, and that is why it is known as Reformation. Two main figures which we come to know when we talk about Reformation is Martin Luther and John Calvin. And those who believe in the ideas told by Calvin is known as Calvinism. Now, John Calvin and Martin Luther believed that church had become kind of too much into doctrines and rituals, and in that context it was getting kind of very elevated from mass for the people, and it had become an asset for the rich and the powerful. So therefore they were against the hierarchical authority structure and doctrine, and they stressed about simplicity, austerity and devotion. There were four principal forms of ascetic Protestantism, or we can say branches of Protestantism. The first was Calvinism, which is the ideas propagated by John Calvin. And John Calvin kind of emphasized on God's sovereignty in all things. So he was the one who believed that there is one powerful who determines everything, and nobody can question his decision. There is no intermediaries. You cannot bring about a change in the decision of the Almighty, and therefore there was no role of priest, or there was no role of any institution to mediate between individual and God. So he called the Reformed tradition or Reformed theology and believed in predestination. Now, we will look into what is predestination later. First, let us understand the branches. The second branch is Pietism. In Pietism, there was an invisible church of the elect visible on this earth. So, the church is not necessarily a structure which is made by individual, but is already existing, and it is kind of giving more stress on blissfulness of community with God in this life. The third branch of Protestant is Methodism. Methodism is emotionally certainty of salvation as the immediate result of faith. Now, salvation is part of all religion, and the ultimate desire is to achieve what in Hinduism is called as moksha. So, in Protestantism also there is the desire for salvation. Now, emotional act of conversion is kind of induced in this in religion. Emotions once awakened was directed into a rational struggle for perfection. So you are not going to kind of be emotionally disturbed by the fact that you are born as a poor, but rather kind of take it as a sign by the Almighty for more work. So you work harder and you work more and more harder, you give up your frugal life, you give up your luxurious life, and therefore by working hard and in the rational legal method, you will change the way in which you live your life. So you will move towards perfection. So salvation is not in terms of achieving a space in some aboard any what we would call as a heaven or a hell, but it is a desire to achieve the category of the chosen by the God. And the Methodism provided a religious base for ascetic conduct after the doctrine of predestination has been given by these folk. So basically, if we look into the 4 branches of Protestantism, what are some of the common thing is predestination, the question of calling, and labor, that is work hard, is a movement towards progress. And the 4th branch of Protestantism was Baptist movement. And here the church was viewed as a community of personal believers. Salvation was achieved by personal and individual revelation. It was offered to everyone, though not everyone took it. Now, when we look into Weber's approach and try to understand religion and social change, Weber was specifically focusing on Calvinism. And Calvinism, as we have said, is a branch of Protestantism. Basically, it is the ideas propagated by John Calvin. And he believed that everything in the world was predetermined by God. So, God was kind of considered as something which was of supreme sovereignty. There was nobody above. He was all powerful, transcendent, and his will was unknowable. So you did not require middle people or middlemen in between. You did not require the role of a priest or pandit or any say kind of Maulvis or any individual to mediate between the God and the people, because his decision could not be changed. Now this is the doctrine of predestination. Predestination means your situation on earth has already been decided by the Almighty, whether you are the chosen or the damned. Chosen or the elect, there are 2 categories. One is the chosen, which is the elect of the God, and the other are the damned. Now, how will you know whether you are a chosen or a damned? The indication is there on earth itself. You will know that you are a chosen and elect by God when your economic condition is good, or you have a lot of wealth. So in order to ensure that you kind of be the category of chosen, you do not need anybody to tell you. You yourself become aware of it, and you can work by becoming a chosen. So you work hard and harder and harder and kind of accumulate wealth and join the category of the elect. This is the Protestant ethic. Now, success in this world is a sign of salvation in the next world. The Calvinist took it as the duty to demonstrate proof of his salvation. So you have, in order to ensure that you are going to be the chosen one or the elect in the next life, you have to prove it in this life. And that's why it is called this worldly asceticism. You work hard and ensure that your economic wealth is accumulated and you have achieved salvation. The Calvinists believe that everything in the world is predetermined by God. Predetermined means that God had already chosen who has to go to heaven and who would not. Because this belief had serious implication for the rest of a person's life, Calvinists focused a great deal of attention on looking for evidence as who was the saved and who was the damned. According to Weber, the Calvinists searched for evidence of God's approval or disapproval, led them to see their marketplace successes as a sign that they were adhering to God's expectations. So it's not that because they are accumulating wealth, they are kind of going against religious. It is religion which is telling them to accumulate more and more wealth. Now, this accumulation is not necessarily going to lead to exploitation or appropriation, because everyone is going to do it in a rational, legal manner. And how will the wealth increase? When the business expands or the profession expands, and it will provide employment to others. So therefore, this element that those who accumulate wealth will necessarily lead to another class which is going to be left out is something which is not part of Weber's theory. To convince others that they were already chosen, Calvinists would work hard and sacrifice for future, because God would only select the industrious. So you are not going to the individuals on earth are not going to determine on astrology or any other kind of moksha, dan, nothing. Only economic action is the way to salvation. So the work hard and improve your position in the market, that is, increase your exchange value in the market, you are going to be selected as the industrial. So connected to the concept of predestination is the concept of calling. Now, the term calling in Calvinism means that it has a kind of a task set by God. Calling means that you are being called for this action. So the conception of calling was put by Martin Luther, and he kind of tells us that it is the desire, or rather not the desire, it is a verdict of God that you need to work hard. So calling is the labor or the vocation. You have to dedicate your life to labor or to your vocation. Whatever work you are doing, do it in a morally, legal and correct way, and ensure that you succeed in it. And that is what is the command on earth of God. So success is the only sign of salvation in the next world. The Calvinist took it as his duty to demonstrate proof of his salvation, and this was through rational, methodical, self-control and self-discipline. So the Protestant ethic is basically trying to discipline individual's life according to Weber. So you have to kind of have self-control. Why self-control? Will not indulge in useless consumption. You will not indulge in wasting the wealth that you have attained. Why? Because if you waste your wealth, then you will kind of become the damned one. And you don't want to be damned. If you are a true Protestant, you want to be the selected one. So you will not waste your wealth. You will only use it for economic activity. And that is what is a quote from John Calvin. Every hour lost is lost to labor for the glory of God. And that is what the Protestant believe, that individuals have one life on earth. And that life has to be put into full use for glorifying God. So the more beauty, how will you glorify God? And that is kind of indirectly means that if every one of us do our economic activity and we are not going to waste, or we are not going to use into something which is not required, there will be discipline, there will be self-control, and there will be a place of less violence and conflict. So labor as vocation. Calvinist idea of vocation meant constant methodical work. Their wealth performed a psychological function that allowed them to cope with the salvation panic. So, we don't have to be worried about, we don't have to be psychologically disturbed about whether we will get salvation or not. We are just going to look into our work and do work in a systematic methodological method, and that will take care of our emotions and psychological disbalance. The accumulated wealth which is kind of earned. So you individuals work hard, they accumulate wealth. What do they do with the wealth? They reinvest into their business. Material prosperity is the only symbol or token of God's election. Human beings have to work for the glory of God, and this is kind of related to this worldly asceticism. Now we know what is Protestantism, we know what is Calvinism. Now how did Calvinism create capitalism? Hard work combined with ascetic, that is, ascetic means you lead a life of a saint. Now this is a difference between this worldly asceticism and the other worldly asceticism. In Hinduism, The belief is in otherworldly asceticism. That is, you give up your marital life, you give up your everyday life, you become a sadhu. You go to, say, maybe to isolated place, to the mountains, and you become a sadhu in search of salvation. In Protestant, it is this worldly asceticism. You continue to live your life as an individual. You have your married life, you have your everything life. What you do is, yet you will live a life of an ascetic. What does it mean? That you're not going to waste your earnings on useless or luxurious consumption. So that will kind of lead to what? It is kind of leads to profit. So you earn, you accumulate wealth. Now that accumulated wealth is supposed to be a profit, and that is what is capitalism. So if Protestant ethic then leads to expansion of capitalism, which is an unintended consequences of Calvinism. It's not that Calvinism wanted capitalism to take place, and that is why it was disciplined. It was a movement which emerged because of certain bad practices that happened in Christianity, and in an attempt to purify it, certain ways were thought of. Now when the people started practicing that ethic, it unintendedly or led to the growth of capitalism. Now capitalism, Calvinist religious belief and rationalization of those beliefs, anxiety over hard work and afterlife frugality as sign of salvation. So the whole idea of Protestant ethic is on accumulation of wealth, and there is no kind of enjoyment on spontaneous enjoyment, anything that kind of takes you away from economy. So you are only going to live a life for your labor or for your vocation that you are doing. So accumulation is the spirit of capitalism. So spirit of capitalism is basically, number one, accumulation, number two, rational action, and everything, you have this account keeping, you have a profit register, you have expenditure, profit, everything. So everything is documented, legitimate, and bureaucracy is an institution that helps you to control the growth of capitalism. He decides to start with a document which contains what we are looking for in almost all classical purity, and turns to the writing of Benjamin Franklin. So Weber, his work is making reference to large amount of Benjamin Franklin's writing, and Franklin has said time is money. So he's kind of looking into how accumulation is the spirit of capitalism. So if you waste your time, implies that you have lost those hours of earning, and your capacity to become a capitalist declines. What are the prominent values and ethics? Instrumental orientation to life. Instrumental orientation means you are oriented towards your vocation, to your labor. Number two, utilitarian ethics. Utilitarian ethic means every action will have a utility. You are not going to sit idle, because sitting idle would means the time is wasted and labor is being wasted. So every hour that you are working or you are on earth, you are going to be engaged in doing utility or doing some work. Critical of consumption. So now we see that we go on consuming, whether we need it or we don't need, we go on purchasing. So that has been termed as conspicuous consumption. We are not even aware of our consumption. In capitalism or the spirit of capitalism, you have to have critical controlled consumption. You are not going to uselessly consume things over and above your basic necessity. So there is an affinity between Calvinism and asceticism. In Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, Weber detected this worldly asceticism. He is basically stressing about discipline, and that is what we begin with the understanding of religion. Religion is only a way of life. It's telling us how to discipline our life. It is kind of telling us how to master the environment. So the most simple, frugal lifestyle along with hard work has been recommended. Now, if we look into what Weber was saying, is if we were not going to be engaged in so much of conspicuous consumption, we would have not been exploiting the environment around us, we would not have been using the natural resources over and above our need, and so many problems related to the environment would have not been the cause. So that is what he is hinting towards, and basically he's a kind of critic in terms of in which the movement has taken place. So a simple frugal lifestyle along with hard work was recommended. The idea that honesty is the best policy was the principle of early capitalism. Asceticism means strict self-discipline, control and conquest of desire. So this worldly asceticism versus the otherworldly asceticism, and Weber's Protestant ethic emphasizes on this worldly asceticism. The Protestant ethic is basically an ideal type, and this is also something which is part of Weber's theory. When we read Weber, we know he has given us this ideal type, but just as Durkheim gave the concept of social fact, Weber gives us the ideal type. Now, what is the ideal type? The ideal type is basically a model, so it should be like that, not necessarily that reality is in the reflection of it. So Protestant ethic is basically an ideal type, which is the heart of the spirit of capitalist culture. An action orientation idea of calling, individual must view accumulation of profit as a spiritual calling. Hard work is a sign of God's favor. Now the doctrine of predestination is that we have, which we already discussed, that our path of to heaven or hell are predetermined by God, allowed justification of a class system. So now this is again a difference which we see from Marx, where Marx was kind of saying that the class has created because of the difference in the ownership of means of production, and the class consciousness would increase, the working class would revolt against the capitalist class, and a classless society would be formed, which has been termed as utopian, which never took place. But here Weber is saying that if it has already been destined by God, who are the damned and who are the elected, then people are satisfied with the status quo. So there is no kind of a conflict between the two different groups. So he is basically giving justification of the class status. Now, denial of worldly asceticism: work hard but don't play hard. Save and invest to accumulate more. Weber continues to argue against the idea that spirit of capitalism is just a reflection of economic reality. Protestant ethics, spirit of capitalism based on economic rationalism and modern capitalism. So this modernity was basically based on rational action, and he is giving a justification of how modernity is reflecting that, how modern society is more rational. So, if we kind of move from, say, kind of different types of action and modern society as reflecting rational legal society, then the spirit of capitalism is an indication of that. Far from automatically reflecting an economic base, he says it was quite extraordinary that this ethos emerged, giving the striving for financial gain considered to be low status, undignified behavior in most societies. Protestant ethic: work not leisure, and employment to increase the glory of God. So this is the some of the way areas in which we see an affinity between Protestant ethic and the spirit. So one common idea which is in both is work. Both in Protestantism and the capitalism, work is not to be seen as leisure. You are not going to lightly consider work. You have to look into employment, and not only as a kind of an individual desire to increase income and increase your efficiency to consume good, but on the contrary, you are going to look into work as vocation. What does that mean? Vocation is in the sense that you are doing that work for increasing the glory of God. Number 2 is time is money. What does that mean? That means, as I've already explained earlier, we are not going to waste. Wasting time is sinful. Human life is of short span and we only have one life. So why waste time? So every hour that you waste is the hour wasted in, and the glory of God is kind of reduced. Loss of time through leisure, parties, sleeping more than 8 hours is a waste of time. Every hour lost is labor lost for the glory of God. So, we have so much nowadays, we have more and more ways of wasting time. We go on kind of going through social media, mobile apps. So, we see the efficiency of individuals have reduced. And this wasting time is reflected in the work, where the progress of the work or the worker is kind of constrained. The next important common affinity is sexual asceticism. Now, in understanding marriage, sexuality is required only for the purpose of reproduction. So, even in Protestant ethic, any kind of sexual relation outside the marriage or outside for the act of reproduction is considered as a sin. It is not considered to be justified or legitimate in the, and that is again, if you are indulged in such activity, it would be killing time and labor. To work hard is your calling, labor considered as an end in itself. Unwillingness to work or laziness is symbolic of lack of grace. So if you are lazy, if you are wasting time, it is also a symbolic of the fact that God has not elected you. Therefore, we need to be cautious about a way in which we work. We have to be very concerned about how we live our life. So basically, if we look into Weber, where his idea of Calvinism, he was reading from Richard Baxter's Christian Dictionary and giving us all this concept of calling, predestination, this worldly asceticism. There are other sources also, but he is mostly relying on Richard Baxter's understanding. Labor for the practical promotion of moral life through church. Puritan writing condemned the pursuit of wealth for individual need, acquisition only for doing good of society. So here you are accumulating, but it is not for your individual. You are not going to spend it on your individual luxury. It is for the society, because the more economic activity, the more the benefit to the society. So there is a never ending desire to acquire more, accumulate more for the welfare of the society. So with this affinity between Protestant ethic and Christianity, Weber explains religion as a discipline, controlled and moral way of earning and giving way to capitalism. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.